Rudeness and arrogance as a distinctive diplomatic style.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning, sir. How are you? Idiots.
According to the statements of the Lithuanian president, there is no brain in his head. Lie as an official work tool.
We did not attack anyone.
Russian military does everything to avoid civilian casualties. They do not attack civilian objects.
По гражданским объектам.
Fakes and fairy tales speaking out in the corridors of major international institutions.
American scientists tested dangerous biomedication on patients of Kharkiv psychiatric hospital.
Paranoid suspiciousness and a search for external enemies.
Anglo-Saxons justify all these criminal ventures.
The approach of military infrastructure to the borders of the Russian Federation within the NATO framework, the Russian Federation will be forced to take retaliatory measures. Justification of the war and crimes of the Russian army in Ukraine.
The way Hitler wanted to finally solve the Jewish question, the United States is waging war against our country through Ukraine.
Degradation and isolation instead of brilliant diplomatic triumphs. How has the Russian foreign ministry turned from a diplomatic agency into Putin's loyal mouthpiece, and how has it failed all the tasks set by the Kremlin owner? Watch the special report Espionage or Diplomacy, the history of Russia's foreign policy failure. Diplomacy, the supreme skill of foreign policy. The state course in the international arena is determined by the country's leadership, but it is carried out by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. It is diplomats who set the tone for relations with other countries. They are among the most recognizable politicians in the world. They establish friendly, cultural and economic ties. The reputation and image of the state depends on their professional and moral qualities, as well as on the strategy of their actions. But all this has little to do with Russia. Instead of top-quality diplomats, there are servants of the Kremlin who resemble clowns more and more every day.
When the West talked about universal human values and security in the region from the Atlantic to the Urals, it was nothing but hypocrisy.
Sergei Lavrov is the leading diplomat of the Russian Federation, the face of the Russian Foreign Ministry for the last 20 years. This is a record time for a minister to hold such a position, but the 73-year-old head of the diplomatic service is a long-time and loyal companion of Putin.
I will ask the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Sergei Viktorovich, you to outline the situation that is currently on the table at this point of time. In general, the situation is disturbing. The Europeans have started to follow American policy.
Famous, titled and awarded Lavrov is a hero of labor of the Russian Federation and a full cavalier of the Order of Merit to the Fatherland. But it seems that the main of these merits is his support for the actions of Russia's political leadership and his justification of its war crimes.
The United States and its allies have made a rather aggressive statement accusing Russia of, as they say, unprovoked aggression against Ukraine. This aggression was provoked by them, actually.
Putin's policy, with its suspicion and search for external threats, is firmly imprinted in the official position of the Russian Foreign Ministry and in the minister's rhetoric. NATO member states, for him as well as for Putin, are Russia's main enemies.
Western countries have not only maintained NATO, but also set a course of impudent takeover of the space and territories where vital interests of Russia have always existed.
And in general, Lavrov says the entire collective West is the insidious and sneaky, and its main goal is the same, the destruction of Russia, and that is why they have started a war against it.
Гитлер мобилизовал, захватил и поставил под ружье большинство.
Just the way Hitler mobilized, captured and put most European countries under arms and threw them against the Soviet Union, now the United States have formed coalition. By proxy, they are waging the war through Ukraine against our country. The objective is the same. They want to finally solve the Russian question, just as Hitler wanted to finally solve the Jewish question. The Ukrainians have apparently been told by their American owners we must exhaust the Russian army more with your help. The war has not yet brought enough enrichment to those who supervise it, those who conduct it.
Дирижирует.
Russia itself, according to Lavrov, is peace-loving, and by unleashing a bloody war against Ukraine, which infringes on its sovereignty and kills thousands of its citizens, it appears to be bringing peace.
Russia has clearly explained the objectives of the special military operation. These are to eliminate the threats to our security created by NATO for years directly on our borders and to protect people from threats, extermination and exile from the territory where their ancestors have lived for centuries.
The title diplomat statements are often undiplomatic. He is not gentle when speaking about the leaders of other countries. Here he is commenting on US President Joe Biden's visit to Kyiv.
There is a performance from the point of view of our former Western colleagues and from the point of view of saving the Nazi regime.
Here he is being rude towards the President of France, Emmanuel Macron.
Macron, he himself apparently feels his helplessness when he has been cuckooing and the morning doesn't come for years. Feels himself a vassal of the United States, but there's nothing he can do about it.
Here he is leveling European top officials with charlatans and fraudsters for sanctions against Russia.
The same Ursula von der Leyen tried to justify the laws that need to be passed in order to steal money from the Russian state and Russian citizens. Many experts recall German Foreign Minister Ribbentrop. Just as Lavrov, he started out, let's say, as a world-class diplomat, a widely respected man, Lavrov was the same in those years. The best diplomats of the world, and not only diplomats, but also heads of countries and governments of other countries, considered it an honor to communicate with him. But gradually he simply turned into a world laughingstock, I would say. That is such schizophrenia, diplomatic and political.
To match Lavrov, there is his combative friend. And this is normal for the West if in the morning a person was a man and by the evening the same person turned into a woman, and on the next day it is neither a man nor a woman. Maria Zakharova, the official herald of the Russian Foreign Ministry. Among them, she is a ballbuster, cheese, and the white Russian soul. I personally give you permission, I authorize you, you might say, I command you.
Можно сказать, повелеваю.
Cocky and arrogant, Zakharova's communication style is much too far from diplomacy.
Я прям накипела. Во-первых,
I am just fed up. First of all, let's start by saying that the collective West is far from being the rest of the world. It's a minority.
это его меньшинство. Сытые.
They are well-fed, wealthy, prosperous, and yet they are still thinking about ways of creating more problems in the world.
Создать в мире проблем.
Declarative tone, harsh outbursts, and unflattering epithets made Zakharova one of the most scandalous news and fake makers. I think the Estonian political establishment does not hesitate to do anything, including resorting to outright theft and banditry. If there are red lines in the head, then there are no brains. Judging by the statements of the Lithuanian president and many other representatives of the regimes in NATO countries, they really have some red lines in their heads and maybe also black squares.
США.
The US ambassador to Norway compared the special military operation in Ukraine to Hitler's invasion of Norway in 1940. This is, of course, an example of not just some, political rudeness, but extreme ignorance and blasphemy.
Крайнего невежества и кощунства.
Zakharova comments emotionally and artistically on literally everything, from UNESCO's inclusion of Ukrainian borscht in the list of intangible cultural heritage.
Нельзя было делиться борщом.
One couldn't share borscht. You can't. It has to belong to someone individually, one nationality, and nothing like the thing that it has to be shared. No, this is exactly what we're talking about. Xenophobia, Nazism, extremism of all kinds.
Нацизм. Экстремизм во всех видах.
Up to existential and civilizational issues. We still remain Europeans, but Western and Northern Europe have lost their Europeanity.
Европейство.
And tellingly explains how Russia views international law and institutions.
Даже если
Even if something is indeed being prepared in the halls of the International Criminal Court, this something will not make any significance for a country at all.
такого значения.
Что они сейчас делают? Да, они качают.
What are they doing now? They're spreading propaganda in many countries. We cannot say that they are some important part of the decision-making mechanism in today's Russia. It is only about Putin and other people there. The Russian Foreign Ministry should be treated as a certain body that is monitoring the situation today and broadcasting some fakes.
Транслируют какие-то фейки.
Вот она.
That's the difference in mentalities. And there is another level of loud phrases and words.
A Russophobic neo-Nazi dictatorship has been formed on our borders, proclaiming war on all Russian things.
Russian ambassador to the United Nations and the UN Security Council, Vasily Nebenzia. For the last 6 years, he has been the main mouthpiece of Russian disinformation and propaganda at the UN, the main international platform that was created to maintain peace and security and for cooperation between states. But sitting in hostile New York, Nebenzia does not establish partnership relations, but ruins them with every word he utters more and more.
Through the media controlled by the collective West, man-hating and utterly false attitudes are propagated. White is presented as black and vice versa.
Nebenzia's task in the UN is simple. He has to voice the wildest fakes and fables out.
American scientists tested dangerous biomedication on patients of Kharkiv Psychiatric Hospital. There is an issue of a US patent on a drone for airborne dissemination of infected mosquitoes that are intended to be used as biological weapons.
To cynically disrupt a moment of silence for Ukrainian citizens killed by Russia.
Господин председатель, настаем, чтобы почтить.
Mr. Chairman, we stand up to honor all the victims of the events that have happened in Ukraine since 2014. All those who have lost their lives, every life is precious.
Those who perished.
To counter the Ukrainian agenda and speeches by Ukrainian diplomats and President Zelensky.
What grounds do you have for a suggestion that President of Ukraine Volodymyr Zelensky is given the floor to speak before the members of the Council, many of whom are also representatives at the level of heads of state and government?
To lie and justify the war crimes of Putin's regime in front of the entire world community.
This is a
special military operation. I wouldn't call it a war, because a war is an open military action. We are only striking military facilities in Ukraine and not striking civilian infrastructure.
civilian infrastructure.
Even Nebenzia's appearance, I'm thinking of Robert Burns when I look at him. That there is a falsehood in his look, I must and will deny. They tell their master is a knave, and sure they do not lie. The use of accusations in absentia and name-calling has become a favorite tactic of our Western colleagues.
Such are the faces of Russia's foreign policy propaganda. They repeat President Putin's position unconditionally and almost word by word. There can be no misreadings or mistakes. In fact, there are Freudian slips from time to time. This is how they commented on the awful horrors all of us saw in the Kyiv region, which came to light after the deoccupation of its settlements. Mass murders of civilians and atrocities committed by the Russian army in Bucha, proving by more than a few independent investigations, are categorically denied by both Putin and all the major players of the diplomatic front of Russia.
When they staged provocations in Syria, when they portrayed the use of chemical weapons by the Assad's regime, it's a fake, just as false as the same one in Bucha.
There was a criminal staging of the alleged killing of civilians by Russian military personnel organized.
Военнослужащих.
It's just a staging that is being hyped all over the media by Ukrainian representatives and their Western patrons.
Западные покровители.
Now, if you
look closely at what you see in Bucha, the bodies that are lying in the streets were not there before the Russian troops came in. I mean, left it. Excuse me.
before the Russian troops arrived, left, sorry. before they left.
But after numerous visits by leaders of state, representatives of the International Criminal Court and journalists, the words of Putin, Lavrov, Zakharova and Nebenzia are believed only by fanatics of war and the ruling regime. Russia has turned off most of the civilized countries of the world from itself by the total lies, manipulations and outright nonsense that the foreign ministry trio is replicating at the request of the Kremlin's owner. It has been excluded from key international formats. Diplomatic orators have failed in their main mission to whitewash the crimes of their dictator. However, as well as another integral part of the so-called Russian diplomacy, this is the creation of an effective large-scale spy network through ambassadors in other states. The presence of agents of the Committee for State Security among diplomats is a practice that was resorted to back in the Soviet Union.
People who went as citizens of the Soviet Union with these passports to work in Soviet foreign institutions, embassies, consulates, trade missions, cultural organizations. Even in small countries, there was Soviet intelligence working in the Western world, in the United States. Even the great Soviet diplomats faithfully served one of the greatest perverts in world history, Stalin. Both Chicherin and Litvinov, as well as Gromyko, who was called Mr. No, they got defensive with any Western proposals for normalization of relations.
Putin has not rejected this mechanism. He built a Russian undercover diplomatic spy network based on the USSR model.
He has placed his people everywhere, including the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. At the beginning of the 2000s, out of the blue, there appeared either 2 or even 3 new deputy foreign ministers, that is, Lavrov deputies. They were former major officials in the Russian intelligence service who were simply appointed to the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs in order to control all processes, including personnel and everything else. And that's why the foreign ministry eventually turned into a very definite appendage of the Kremlin. Such diplomacy of the intelligence services cannot lead to anything good, because their minds are organized in a completely different way. They are not set up for cooperation, not for any kind of interaction, but they are looking for enemies everywhere. They have conspirators around every corner. And in our country, it's all mixed together thanks to Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin, who trusts his friends from the former KGB and all sorts of diplomats and other civil servants he considers to be just some spies in civilian clothes and not worthy of any trust and attention.
Espionage of fellow citizens who have moved abroad, spying on political opponents and enemies of the Kremlin, wiretapping and obtaining secret data about the host country. This is done by Russian diplomats, or to be more precise, by agents of the Russian intelligence service working under diplomatic cover. After Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, more than 600 of these messed-up Cossacks were exposed and expelled from Europe. 400 of them were recognized as spies. Now many employees of the Russian Foreign Ministry are denied visas by the United States and Great Britain. It is not surprising. Russian investigators of the Dossier Center, in cooperation with their European colleagues, studied satellite images of the roofs of Russian diplomatic missions, and they found that the number of antennas and other wiretapping devices is colossal. There were 17 in the Russian embassy in Belgium, more than a dozen in Madrid, Prague, Belgrade, Lisbon, Sofia and Nicosia.
It is possible to intercept quite a large number of different signals. It could be non-secured communication lines, it could be ordinary telephone communications, communication channels between the airport and airplanes. There is equipment in Russian embassies that can monitor classified lines of communication as well. If there is enough technological staffing and trained specialists, they can listen to the channels of special services and communication channels of the local police. To put it mildly, they can obtain information that is not supposed to be available to the Russian security services.
They also keep an eye on politically active Russian immigrants to punish them later.
The most logical place to organize a protest against Vladimir Putin's regime is the space near the embassy. A street, a public garden, a square. The equipment located inside the embassy enables them to collect metadata, technical characteristics of the devices with which these people came, for example, phone data. Then some of these people have to seek help at the Charité hospital in Berlin with symptoms of poisoning that resemble those after the Novichok.
After expelling undercover agents, Moscow has resorted to more risky methods of espionage, reports The Guardian. It uses so-called sleeper cells, their shadow operatives. Often they are recruited foreigners fed up with anti-American sentiment and offers of generous fees. For example, 3 Russian spies, citizens of Bulgaria, were detained in the UK. They lived within a mile of a Royal Air Force base used by ministers and members of the royal family.
Будут вербовать.
They will recruit them and are recruiting now, of course. In the office of the International Criminal Prosecutor was caught a Russian who allegedly went through Brazil there. They will go through all the cracks and they will know how to do it. The special services there are experienced, they're professional, they're funded by Putin and they get as much as they need. Yes, the Russian system is the real challenge and the real threat.
Создав угрозу, причем
By creating a threat and practically to the entire world, Russia has already found itself in isolation, which it will not overcome as long as the war against Ukraine continues. Until its leader is condemned, all occupied territories are deoccupied and reparations are paid for everything that the Russian army has done since February the 24th, 2022. Foreign policy has failed here as well. Russia's leader is a war criminal and a pariah for the entire civilized world. He is a fellow only among the same dictators and terrorists.
только среди таких же диктаторов и террористов.
His diplomats are doing their best to save the reputation of Vladimir Putin, who has become unreputable and unable to travel after the Hague Court's arrest warrant. They're organizing summits and meetings, however mostly on Russian territory, and Minister Lavrov has replaced the Kremlin owner in practically all foreign visits.
Путин не ездит даже на двадцатку.
Putin doesn't even go to the G20 summit, doesn't go to BRICS. Yes, he has sent Lavrov as his representative. But for leaders like Xi or Modi, well, Lavrov came, Lavrov went. So they only talk to those they consider their equals. And Russia's toxicity is obvious, and not in the Western world only. In fact, Russia has less room for maneuver in many ways.
Пространство для маневра в России во многом меньше.
The Russia-Africa summit, which is not really a summit anymore, has demonstrated this very well.
The Russian foreign ministry is full blast, but Putin's visits to Belarus, to the self-proclaimed leader Lukashenko, to China, to the dictator Xi Jinping, his meeting with Orban, Russia's Hungarian satellite, and even with the North Korean tyrant Kim Jong-un are no longer able to influence the isolation of either Putin personally or Russia. After all, even in the United Nations, out of 193 member states, only 15 countries support Russia's policy.
You can count them with the fingers of one hand. They're Belarus, Iran, North Korea, Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua, Eritrea. That's probably all. Well, there's also Syria and a few small countries. All these countries are either similar to Russia in the problems they live in, that is, they're the same dictatorships, or they're countries that are completely dependent on Russia for everything. Well, like Belarus, in fact, it is occupied by Russia and fully controlled by it. Some are financially dependent, some are dependent on arms supplies, some have their debts cancelled, like some African countries.
Ну, еще один союзник – Никарагуа.
Well, another ally is Nicaragua, and they are pariahs as well. Everyone is wary, distrustful of them, but this is their friend. Even Maduro now, this dictator who replaced Chavez, is also trying to put a face on a bad game, trying to flirt with the Americans.
So Putin's diplomats are trying to sneak a new support group into the UN.
At the initiative of Venezuela, a group of friends in defense of the Charter of the United Nations has been established. We urge you to join it. It is also important to use the constructive potential of the BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. The Eurasian Economic Union, Commonwealth of Independent States, Collective Security Treaty Organization are ready to make their contribution.
Attempts are pointless. After all, Putin searching for support has already drifted into friendship with terrorist organizations. The foreign ministry has established close and strong ties with the Afghan Taliban, Lebanese Hezbollah and Palestinian Hamas, which attacked Israel on October the 7th.
The contacts were not just regular, they were extremely friendly, and Hamas leadership regularly visited Moscow. There were meetings with Putin and with Lavrov and with members of the State Duma. Most countries, I mean democratic countries of the world, recognize all these organizations as terrorists, and Russia, on the contrary, signed some memorandums with them. Netanyahu keeps calling Putin, trying to negotiate something with him, although Russia is no friend of Israel. They need to fundamentally reconsider their attitude to Russia and not consider it in general as their ally.
Мы не можем спекулировать. Приложила одну.
We cannot speculate whether Russia had one hand or two hands to do with that. All this was not prepared for months, probably even years. Perfect planning, worked on by professionals, not by some terrorists and fanatics.
Террористы, фанатики. Вокруг периметра Газы
Israel built a unique system around the Gaza perimeter, and it is not a unique system with millions of detectors, cameras, sensors, respectively, weapons that work remotely. Imagine the complexity and the depth of the cyber attack which has taken place there. Russia benefits from the current situation, from the lack of security.
Сегодняшняя ситуация выгодна. Это отсутствие безопасности.
The operatives in the foreign ministry loyal to Putin carry out any orders from above, even if they are criminal and contrary to common sense. But despite colossal efforts, they fail to deceive the whole world. But Putin's diplomats have talked enough for criminal cases to open for facilitating war crimes.
Responsibility will come one day or another, especially since such crimes, military or close to them, have no time limitation. Each of the Russian leaders, whether it is a foreign minister or their permanent representative to the UN, Nebenzia, will bear his share of responsibility. They will not get away with it.
The Russian foreign ministry under Putin has turned from an agency that could shine on the international stage into a paramilitary organization, or rather a network of spies, a factory of lies and trails. Russia has never made any effort to establish real constructive and respectful relations and cooperation with other countries. As a result, it has failed in the international arena, sliding down to the level of a world pariah and terrorist.
Скатившись до уровня мирового изгоя и террориста.
Ольга Михалюк, Special Report.